That's a bit bright. Yeah. Okay, how are we coming through on the microphone? Can you hear me at the back? All good? Okay. Right. Assignment 1 is done and being marked at the moment. I take it we've all started looking at assignment 2. It's due in a month. Are there any questions on assignment number 2? Assignment number 1, I'll put the marks up on UTS Online once I actually have them all, and we'll start handing the assignments back as the markers complete them. So some of you will probably get it back a little bit before others, but we'll work that one through. Hopefully everyone will get their assignments back within the next fortnight or so. And as soon as I have all of the marks ratified, I will put them up online so you can look at them. Assignment 2, are there any issues or questions about assignment 2? Okay, we'll keep on moving. These chairs are becoming emptier and emptier as time goes by. That's all right. Thursday night is probably not the best night to have a late lecture anyway. Tonight we're going to talk a bit about time management. The thing about time management is that it's a critical aspect of how to run a project, because you need to be able to manage your time to the deliverables, otherwise you're going to run into problems. And I know some of you have issues with this because of the extensions I got requested on assignment 1 and a few people who handed in late. So I know time management could be something that we could work on. I know myself, I'm actually, I used to be very bad at it. I've improved over time. I'm a little bit better than I have been. But it's a critical aspect of project management, because usually when you look at the requirements, when you look at the deadlines that are attached to those requirements, you have to achieve them. If you're late, if you don't achieve the deadlines, then all of the work that you've put into whatever product you've created can be wasted. Once you get past the deadline, people may just decide not to accept it. And you need to take that into consideration. If you're going into information technology as an industry or a discipline, you will be tasked with certain things at certain times. If you're working in a project environment, you have to deliver to those times. If you don't deliver to those times, you may find yourself looking for a new role. So tonight we're going to talk a little bit about time management in terms of activity decomposition, sequencing. I'm going to talk a little bit about network diagrams and how to use PERT, Program Evaluation and Review Technique, critical path, and we're going to talk a bit about estimating. So feel free to ask as we go along. There's a bit of accounting attached to the one tonight. It isn't exactly the most scintillating of my presentations for this course, but please follow along. It's important. Okay, the project life cycle. I put this up many times. You will see this again in not only tonight, but in pretty much every single lecture I will have this one going up. Areas to be planned. We've already covered some of these. Tonight we're going to look at time management. What's the triple constraint? Tell me what the triple constraint is. Yeah?
Money, time, and quality.
Oh, close. Money, time and quality. 2 out of 3. Yeah?
Human resources.
Sorry?
Human resources.
No. The triple constraint. I've mentioned this. I spent time on it in the very first lecture, and we've talked about it a couple of times since. Yes? Scope, cost, and time. That's correct. It's called a triple constraint because when you change one, you've got to look at changing the others, and all of them are required to be met in terms of criteria if the project management is to be regarded as successful. So you've got to meet your requirements, your scope, on time and to the budget that's been set. So one of those particular caveats is time. If you don't do that, then you may as well just waste all of the effort that you've put in. So project time management is meant to look at that particular constraint. What are the things that we actually have to do to deliver a successful project? So ensures timely completion of a project. It starts with task definition, which creates a task list. Now, you'll notice that not only do we have a time constraint, we've got a physical deliverable of some aspect or some way, shape or form, because we have something that we can look at and say we have achieved that particular deliverable. If we're doing task definition and task decomposition, then we should be able to come up with a task list and we should be able to show that to people. Task sequencing, because once we have our tasks, we need to arrange them in the order in which we believe that they should be done. That particular sequence usually ends up as a network diagram with some milestones attached to it so that we can prove that we've actually completed our phase of a particular project. Task resource planning comes up with a requirements list. Task duration estimating comes up with task estimates. And schedule development comes up with a project schedule. Excuse me, guys, if I'm talking, if I can hear you, probably other people can too. You can't manage what you don't know. So part of what you need to do is find out the answers to these particular questions, because if you're going in and you don't know how to come up with an estimate, if you don't know what time you've got to play with, I can pretty much guarantee you won't be able to achieve the deadlines that have been set for you. If you have an assignment that's due on a particular day, but I fail to tell you when it is due, do you think that would be a problem for you? Well, when you take a look at what you have to do, the first thing you need to consider, once you have your scope done and you've got your requirements set out, you need to break those requirements down into a task list. This usually starts with a high-level requirement, high-level task areas, which you break down into what we call a work breakdown structure. The activity that this is, what you're engaged in when you do this, is called task decomposition, where you take a big high-level task and break it into smaller ones. Now, you do this every single day of your life. For those of you that were looking to get here tonight, there was a task list that you executed in a particular sequence in order for you to be sitting in your seats. So when you left home this morning, you had to get up out of bed. You needed to have a shower, you needed to have breakfast, you needed to get in the car or the train or the bus, which meant you needed to get to the bus or train station or go and get your car out of the garage. You needed to drive a particular path or catch a train over a particular train line. You needed to then get off at the destination and work your way through this task list in order for you to be here tonight. Now, you probably didn't think of it in terms of a task list. You didn't think of it in terms of task decomposition. You just thought, I've got to get to UTS because Grant's lecture is so great and I can't afford to miss it. Well, yes, all of that's true, but there was actually a task list that you executed to get here. Now, somewhere in the back of your mind, you broke down the high-level task of get to Grant's lecture by 7:30 p.m. on a Thursday evening into a series of steps that you then executed. That is task decomposition. Now, if one of those steps, and you executed hundreds of them, possibly thousands, in order to be able to get here on time, if one of those had failed, you wouldn't be here. You'd be off somewhere else. So, for example, let's say you had to get into the car, but you went down to the garage and you didn't have the key to start the car up. You'd be sitting in your car right now. You've probably been sitting there for hours because you weren't able to switch on your ignition. You didn't have the key. So the first thing you needed to do was get the key. Any of these steps, if they fail, stop you executing the entire project that you had assigned yourself. So the work breakdown structure is meant to represent the decomposition of high-level tasks into subtasks. And it usually looks like this. So, for example, develop a project plan is point number 1. That creates point numbers 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, etc., down to 1.11, which is the completed project plan. But if you take a look at 1.1.1, divide the project into major deliverables, list activity groups for each deliverable. You actually have sublists under each of these tasks, and this is how you run a project. You take the high-level requirements of the scope, you break the scope into requirements, you break the requirements into high-level tasks, you break the tasks, high-level tasks into lower-level tasks, and you keep going down until you say, I've got enough. My task list is complete because now I know what I have to do. The next thing you have to do after this, of course, is once you have your task list, you have to arrange them in the right order so that you execute them with knowledge of what prerequisites and post-requisites may come into play. There is an ideal way of sequencing your tasks for the most efficient outcome. There are lots of ways you can sequence a task, but some of them will give you a better outcome than others. So the WBS, the work breakdown structure, is the first step along that particular path of working out the most efficient way to create a project plan. Help structure the work, links the scope to the budget and schedule, because you can't do a budget until you work out how much work you've got. You can't estimate the cost of each of these tasks until you figure out, have I got 10 tasks or have I got 1,000 tasks? How much money do I need to ask for in order for me to be able to create this particular product? Should be flexible, use it how it's needed, because even once you've got it down, the project plan never stays the same. It always changes. Change is a given. It's really just about how much change you allow and how you deal with the change when it comes through. Subdivide the project into smaller manageable units, because human behaviour says we don't really think long term. We can think of something that we have to work and deliver tomorrow. Up to about 3 to 4 days out is the norm. If I have to deliver an assignment this week, and let's assume it's Monday and I have a delivery on Thursday, okay, that's something real I can focus on. If the delivery isn't for a month and a half, say 6 weeks out, oh, it's all right, I'll go down to the pub and have a drink with my friends. Because it's not real until we get close. Now, human behaviour says we can focus on things up to about 3 to 4 days ahead under normal circumstances. Now, as a project manager, you need to train yourself to think about things that are a year, up to 2 years away. And you have to make them urgent enough to make sure that people, not just yourself, can work upon them. So let's have a look at the work package. The project breaks down into phases. The phases each have a deliverable, and those deliverables have a list of activities and tasks. Now, the key thing here is milestones, because a milestone is a measurable outcome. It is something we can say, we achieved this particular task, we achieved this particular phase of the project because I have an outcome that I can point to. And it's not just something like, oh, Joe said we did fine. No, it has to be a lot more specific than that. We need an approval document, we need sign-off by the key stakeholders, we need validation to say that the job we set out to do had been completed to the level of quality and time and cost that we had associated with it. Because if we get all of those approvals and all of those ticks in the right place, then we've actually completed this part of the project, or maybe the entire project itself. Without the milestones, we have no evidence, we have no validation, we have no verification. There are other reasons for milestones as well. One is because you set milestones close to where the time frames are that you can focus on. So I can't focus on a time frame that's 18 months away, but I can focus on a time frame that's later this week. So I will set up a series of tasks that will have a milestone due at the end of the week, because that's the sort of thing we can focus on. If you're dealing in an agile environment, it's even closer than that, because forget the end of the week, we're looking at the end of the day. What do we need to do as part of our sprint activity in order for me to get up at my stand-up meeting tomorrow morning and say, I have accomplished all of these things? What milestones did I actually hit? So you start planning out and you look for these events. Have I hit this event? Have I signed it off or got approvals for it? Has it actually occurred? So Significant event or achievement. Phase completion, acceptance of a deliverable, approvals, etc. Keeps the team focused because we can focus on something that's only a few days away rather than a year and a half. Proof of concept. If I can hit that milestone, I know that we are on track. I know that we know what we're doing. Quality control, and it reduces the risk because once we reach this piece of the project and we're able to sign it off and I have a milestone associated with that, I can prove that we can now move into the next part of the project. We can move on to the next steps. So when you take a look at the work package concept, it breaks down into these deliverables via a series of task lists with milestones attached to sublists. But you need the deliverables. You need the milestones because if you don't have them there, there's no proof that you actually did what you did. You could move on to the next phase only to find that because you weren't able to have the evidence that you completed the previous phase, you will run into problems and have to backtrack. And if you have to backtrack and go back to a previous phase of a project, you've just spent time and resources, including money, for no particular outcome. Because you may have to redo the work. So milestone deliverable completion, milestone phase completion, these milestones are actually kind of important. Do we understand what I mean by milestone now? Yes? We're clear? Good. The work breakdown structure then is delivery oriented. It's about creating tangible output. Supports meeting the project's MOV. What's MOV? What is MOV? Please, someone tell me you know what MOV is. Yeah? Thank you. My faith in humanity has been restored. Measurable organisational value. In other words, what is the benefit of us doing this for spending all of this money, taking all of this time, having a team of 30 people that I'm flying all over the country? What benefit to my organisation comes out of all of that? If I'm buying something, I want to see a benefit for it, otherwise the money is just wasted. If I'm investing in creating an outcome, I want to see what benefit that outcome has. This isn't about technology. A lot of technical people think, oh yeah, look, I love this job because I get to play with all of this technology. And the outcome for them is to play with the latest technology. They want to move on to the projects with the latest technology. From an organisational point of view, the benefit is we only have this technology in place because it will help us achieve our outcomes. What are the outcomes? What are the strategic business outcomes that we're trying to achieve by putting this project in? Because my company might be spending $5 million to create a new product. What am I going to do with it when I have it? Is it just going to sit in the bottom shelf? The $5 million doesn't go anywhere? We've created something that no one's going to buy or that no one's going to use? No, we want to put this money into something where a benefit can be accrued. So we have to start with measurable organisational value. That then breaks down. If we're trying to achieve an outcome benefit for the organisation, how do we go about doing that? We create a project. That project has a scope. The scope then breaks down into phases. The phases break down into tasks. And once we have our task list, our work breakdown structure, then we can start sequencing the tasks. We can start putting resources against those tasks, and we can start using estimation techniques to work out how long these tasks might take. Once we do that, we actually have a real schedule that we can put into a Gantt chart, and we have a real budget that we can put up to our chief financial officer or whoever is controlling the budget for this particular project. We have time, scope, quality, and what else? Triple constraint. What is a triple constraint? Money. All of these things come together. I will keep mentioning the triple constraint because you need to think about it in those terms. That is the de facto measure of project management success. Have we managed our time? Have we managed our scoping and requirements? Have we managed the money in order to achieve those? Okay, activity sequencing. Let's talk about that because we're going to have an entire workshop on this coming up. Once we have our task decomposition, we have to be able to put them into the right sequence because, strangely enough, tasks have to be executed in the right order. If you get them out of order, you're going to have a problem. You can't sit in your seat here until you've actually arrived at the lecture theatre. So that means you have to get to this destination before you can sit down. A comes before B. These are the types of things you have to consider. Now, it becomes a lot more complicated when you've got a task list that literally is thousands and thousands of tasks, which some project plans can be. How do you put them into the right sequence to make sure that they're executed in the most efficient way with the budget constraints and the time constraints that you have? So you need to determine your task dependencies and the relationships between these tasks. What task comes before a task? What task comes after a task? What task is independent of the other tasks around it? You need stakeholders to work together to define those dependencies. If you're going on say a skiing holiday down to the snowy mountains, then you need to think about, okay, where do I get my skis from? Where do I get my ski gear? What accommodation do I need to arrange? How do I get my lift tickets? You've got a task list. But you can't start actually skiing on the slopes until you reach the snowy mountains. You can't get to the snowy mountains until you've organised your transport. You can't organise your transport until you figure out what days or what dates you can get your accommodation for, and you can't figure out your accommodation until you work out how many of your friends you're going to take with you. You can't work out how many friends can come until you've spoken to them and they've had a look at their schedules and their calendars and worked out when they can take holidays. Everything has to happen in the right order. Otherwise, you won't be able to have your skiing trip. So you get people together and you start talking. Who can do what? Who is available on a particular day? Who has money to spend? Who has the transport organised? Who wants to camp on a camping ground and who wants to actually stay in a 5-star hotel? All of these things need to be discussed so that you can work out a way for the task list to be executed that you create. And then you have to sequence them. Can some tasks be done in parallel at the same time? Do some tasks overlap? Do others have to be done prior to another task being kicked off? This is where network display diagrams come into their own. You need one of these. A lot of project planning is wrapped around the Gantt chart, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But before you even get to the Gantt chart, you need a work breakdown structure and you need to sequence the tasks so that you understand what comes before what else. Now, a network diagram can be extremely detailed, and I've seen ones that literally would cover an entire wall, or they can be fairly high level with just the key phases of the project and done on one A4 sheet of paper. I've seen it done both ways. But usually the ones that are at a high level are usually just bare bones types of projects, low criticality, usually with a very short time frame. If you're starting to play with complex projects, ones upon which your business will depend, they can get very, very complicated and they can get very messy really easily. An NDD, network display diagram, will show the sequence and help keep it straight because it will link tasks together in a logical order. It'll create a network of tasks that will connect to other tasks. So, each node on a task has a start time, has a finish time, has a duration between the start and finish. How many days are we talking about? Or hours, or whatever it happens to be, weeks, months. It may come before another task, it may come after another task. What tasks can be done at the same time? These are the decisions that you have to be able to come up with. So if we take a look at our network diagram, the first thing we have to do is take our task list and work that out, and then we start linking them together. Sequencing is initially resource people independent and without constraints. Just consider the activities and deliverables. Now, this is important because if you try and put resourcing behind your NDD at the beginning, you're going to create the big bowl of killer spaghetti that you won't know where something starts, you won't know where something stops, and it will be so complicated with you trying to wrap constraints around it at this point when you have so little information that you'll never be able to come up with something that works. So the very first thing you do is throw out all the constraints. Forget about them. We don't use them yet. What you have to look at is the task itself and just what comes before it and what comes after it. What makes logical sense to link together without worrying about constraints? Assume you've got infinite resources at this point. You've got infinite time, you've got infinite money and infinite expertise. Whatever you ask for will be granted to you. God will, look down upon you and smile and tap you on the shoulder with his finger. Now, it doesn't quite work that way in reality, but at this point, you have to start with that as an assumption. Because that will allow us just to focus on prerequisites, postrequisites, and co-requisites for each of the tasks. So, here we have a car wash project. Very, very simple. We're trying to wash the car. This is our entire project. 15 tasks. This is what we've determined our task list looks like to wash the car. The first one is we need to get the car and park it on the grass in the backyard. Task 15, wipe and polish the car, and hopefully all of our project then has been completed. This is a work breakdown structure and task list. It's a work breakdown structure with only one level, and it's a task list with only 15 elements to it. But it is a work breakdown structure and it is a task list. So let's start with a very simple exercise here. We've got all of our task IDs, T01 through T15. What we now need to do is to arrange them in an order. So T01, park the car in the yard. Now, the thing is, time moves from the left-hand side to the right-hand side. So you'll only see these arrows going one direction. They will always move left to right. You can't have an arrow go back the other way. You can't go back in time to pick up a task that you missed. So everything will roll forward from T01. That's our starting point. So we have a start and we have an end. T01 being our start. T02, locate the sponges, buckets and soap. Has to come after T01 because until we've got the car parked in the yard we can't think about washing it. T03 and T04 can actually be done at the same time if you have infinite people working with you. Some can go get the hose, some can go and get the supplies such as the soap and the buckets and the mops and everything else. So you've got a branch from T01 going to T02. T02 can then branch in different directions. T03 then leads into T07 because you can't do T07, which is wetting the sponges with soap and water, until T03, taking the supplies to the yard, has actually been completed. But in the meantime, while you're doing all of that, T04 leads into T05 to T06, and T06 also leads on to T07 because you can't execute and complete T07, wetting the sponges with soap and water, until both 6 and 3 are both done. Are we clear so far?
Oh, sorry. Isn't the hose the part of supplies?
Sorry?
Isn't the hose the part of supplies?
Not for the purposes of this. The question was, isn't a hose a part of the supplies? No, I'm thinking of it as a separate thing. Because maybe the hose is in a separate part of the house. So I've separated it out. All of the other things are sitting in the laundry, but the hose could be sitting in the garden shed. So for the sake of this, as I said, this is just an example. We then get to T07, which is a precursor and prerequisite for T08, and lo and behold, we finish T08, wetting the car with the hose, and now we can do 9, 10 and 11 all in parallel, assuming that we have enough people. So we can have people washing the car body, other people washing the windscreen, other people washing the tyres, and they can all do it at the same time. T09 leads on to T012 because you can't rinse the soap from the car body until you've actually done the washing of the car body. And the same happens for T13 and T14. When you've done 12, 13 and 14 and they're all completed, you've actually washed and rinsed the car off, then you can now get to T15, which is wipe and dry the car and polish it. Lo and behold, project finished. So this is a very simple exercise, taking a task list that we've created and sequencing them in an order that allows us to get to having a clean car. Now, I can put other tasks in. This list can be quite detailed. If I wanted to vacuum the car, if I wanted to, buff it up and, blacken the tyres and, all sorts of things. I could add those tasks in. So this 15 task list can go out to 100 tasks quite easily. I could also take some of them out if I want to. But I need to think about, if I'm playing with the task list, I need to make sure they're in the right order. Because otherwise, if any of these tasks fails to execute successfully, it will hold up everything that comes after it. So this is a network display diagram. And NDD down the bottom. Which brings me to my next point, which is every time you're looking at a sequence like this, as I said, time goes left to right, but there's always a starting node and there is always an ending point, an ending node. So you can't have multiple start positions and you can't have multiple end positions. It's like, a road race. You've got to start at the starting line and you have to end at the end line. You can't go off and do your own thing and think you're going to win the race. You actually have to reach the end point that you had said you were going to reach. So that's two of the rules. Every network display diagram has a starting point and an end point. So let's talk about PERT. By the way, if you have any questions as we go through, because this is kind of important and I want you to understand what we're talking about here. So if you need me to stop and ask for clarification, please do so. I'll give you a hint. Something like this would be useful for the exam. That's actually probably more than a hint, isn't it? Okay. Program and evaluation review technique. It's been around for a long time. It's been around for about 70 years. So this isn't new. But it's something that we can build on. There are two versions of PERT. One is called activity on the arrow, and the other one is called activity on the node. I like activity on the node. Activity on the arrow is too damn complex and difficult to understand unless you've practiced it. I've used both, but I much prefer activity on the node. It's much clearer. And that's what I'm going to be talking to you about tonight. I'm not going to worry about activity on the arrow. You can go and look at that yourself on Wikipedia if you really want to, or pick up a project management book. I'm going to teach you a little bit about PERT diagrams as an activity on the node. So you need to work out duration. Once you have task lists and you've worked out some concept of sequencing, you need to work out how long each of the tasks is going to be. So here is one mechanism that will allow you to do it. Duration of the task from start to finish. Take the most optimistic time. If I have the most experienced developer on a particular piece of programming code that I want them to create, an experienced person might be able to do it in one working day. Plus 4 times the likely time, a medium-level experienced person, they might take about 2 days. They'll take twice as long as an experienced individual, but we go 4 times that likely time. And the most pessimistic time, if this was a raw trainee working on their first program in this particular language and they've just picked up a book and done a little bit of training on it, but this is their first time at software development, then we go with the most pessimistic time because it might take them 9 days to get a working program. And you string all of that together and divide it by 3, and that gives you 3 as a most likely estimate for a task duration. This is not perfect. It's just an estimate. Another word for an estimate is a guess. Best guess based on the information that we have, hopefully an informed guess. Hopefully done by people who are experienced at doing this type of guesswork so that it will reflect reality, or at least you're hoping it will. Because when we start putting these in, we have to create a network diagram like this. And when we start looking at PERT sequencing, the nodes, the tasks, break down into these different attributes and characteristics. So T1, T2, T3, T4, assume that they're the tasks. They have a node ID, T1 through T5. They have an earliest time when you can start the task and working on it, and they have an earliest end for when it is done. So if your duration is, say, 5 days on a task, maybe you can start it on Monday and finish it on Friday. Or maybe you start it on Tuesday and finish it on Saturday. But there is an earliest start and an earliest end for that task, and that task will move about within that particular interval depending on how you sequence things. There is a latest start and there is a latest end. So for example, if you have a deliverable of assignment 1 on a Sunday night and you think that it's going to take you 5 days to write it, you can start writing it on the previous Monday and have it finished by Friday. But the latest time you can start this task is on the Wednesday, because you need Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday and Sunday in order to be able to complete it, to get your 5 days. So you know that you have to start this task no later than Wednesday morning. And yet some of you didn't quite manage to make it. Moving on. Float. We'll talk about that in a minute. Because once you've worked out what your durations are and when your start and end points can be, then you can work out the latency as to how much slack time you have. Because if you've got a 5-day task that it's due on Sunday and you can start it at least 5 days before it, you can start it on the Monday, but you have to start it by the Wednesday, that means that you've got a 2-day slack time. Because you can start it Monday, Tuesday, or wait until Wednesday. You've got 2 days to play with. But you have to start it no later than Wednesday. So your float becomes that slack time. And I'm going to show you how to calculate this. So the first thing we do with our 5 tasks down here, let's assume task 1 is 4 days in duration. Task 2 is 3 days. Task 4 is 5 days. Task 3 is 2 days. Task number 5 is 6 days. And this particular aspect of the project is then completed. So we put the durations down that we've worked out against each of the task areas. We then start at point 0. No time elapsed yet. 0 plus 4, which is the duration of task number 1, gives us our earliest endpoint, 4 days in. So we start at point 0, we end 4 days later. But that allows us then to begin task number 2, because task number 1 now being complete. So we take, as a starting point for task 2, the end point of task 1, which means we transfer 4 across. So 4 now becomes the earliest start point for task number 2, 4 days into our project. 4 plus 3 is 7. We then take 7 and we've got a branch, because we want to do task 4 and task 3 at the same time, but we're starting both of those tasks on day 7, so we have to put day 7 here as our earliest start point. We now work out the arithmetic for that. 7 plus 5 on task number 4 gives us a day 12 completion time. 7 plus 2 for task 3 gives us day 9 completion time. When can we start task number 5? What day do we start task number 5? Sorry? 12? Yes. It has to be 12. Because task number 5 needs both T3 and T4 to both complete. Having one of them complete is not sufficient. They both have to be complete. So you take the longest time forward. So we can only start task number 5 on day 12. 12 plus 6 gives us 18. So this particular project is 18 days long. This is how you work out how long a project will take. When you start working through your sequencing like this, you can actually say this project is 240 days, this project is 571 days, this project will be 1,675. This is how you do it. This is how you work out nose to tail what task you're going to need, depending on the sequencing. And if every task followed every other task like a snake, one task after the other, it would be really easy to estimate a project. Because everything is done in a serial fashion. You have to finish one task and it just moves on to whatever the next task happens to be. The problem comes when you start paralleling tasks and trying to do lots of tasks at the same time. Because now you've got to work out across my network how long it will take me to complete all of the prerequisites for a new task to begin. Okay, now this is what's called the forward pass. This gives us the duration of the project. This is how long the project is. We've done our forward pass. Now we do what we call our backward pass. The backward pass is important because it tells us the critical path. So the point of going forward is project duration. Coming back is working out the critical path, and here's how you do it. The latest end point is still day 18, so we start there. 18 minus 6 gives us 12 as our latest start point. Now, we have to take that and put it into here, because that gives us the latest end point for tasks 3 and 4. Both happen to be 12. So, starting with task 4, 12 minus 5 gives us 7. Task 3, 12 minus 2 gives us 10. You see what's happening here? We're no longer having the same numbers put into each of the boxes. When we go from these two multiple tasks back to the single prerequisite task, we take the shortest one. So we move down 7 to be our latest end for task 2. 7 minus 3 gives us 4. We take 4 across. 4 minus 4 gives us 0, and we're back to our start. That's the backward pass. Take a look at where we are, though, because this is where float comes into play. Float is the difference between our lines, between the earliest start and the latest start, and or the earliest end and the latest end. How long can we delay a task before we absolutely have to start it off in order to be able to finish it on time? So 18 minus 18, if we look at task number 5, for example, 18 minus 18 and 12 minus 12 both give us a float of 0. There is no slack time at all. We have no buffer, we have no room to move. We have to start this task exactly when we scheduled it. We can't wait a day. We don't have that luxury. Task 4 is the same. 12 minus 12 is 0. 7 minus 7 is 0. But take a look at task 3, because the difference between 12 and 9 is 3, and the difference between 10 and 7 is 3, so our float is 3. This means we have a buffer of 3 days at this point. Because we're waiting on task 4 to finish, and it's a longer task, we've got a 3-day window or buffer where we can choose or not choose to start task 3. But task 2 and task 1 are both float of 0. So our critical path from our project start and end nodes are where the red arrows go. Follow float 0. If you have a path leading through with lots of zeros on it as the float, that means you've got no slack time on that path. This path has to start and finish exactly when you said. Because if anything on this path is delayed at all, even if you only lose 1 day, everything after that point is slowed down by 1 day. Your project is now late. You can tell using this method. By the time you get through task 1 to task 2, I, as a project manager, if I have a network diagram like this, I can tell my project is already running late. No one else may know at this point. They've all executed their individual tasks. No one else knows the fact that we are behind. But I'm the project manager, and I put this diagram together, and I know that if task number 1 or task number 2 slow down, my entire project after that point is now out of my timeline. My project is running late, and I've only just begun it. What would you do in this situation if you've just identified that your project is running late by a couple of days because, say, task 1 didn't take 4 days, it took 6. You'd estimated it at 4, but the reality was it was 6 days. So it's 2 days late. You've identified at the end of task 1. What are you going to do? Yeah?
Execute your risk mitigation plan.
Execute your risk mitigation plan. Possibly, if a risk has been triggered. A project task running late is not necessarily enough to trigger a risk unless it's actually a critical task of some description. But what are you going to do? You are now 2 days behind and you've just begun the project. Yeah?
Ask for 2 days or throw more money in.
Okay, you ask for an extension of 2 days, or you throw more resources into it to try and bring it back. Yeah, either one of those. So you have to change your timeline, or you have to get more budget in order to be able to keep your requirements intact. Remember the triple constraint. You change one, the others are likely to change as well. This is what's being shown here. This is what float is meant to tell you. This is why critical path is so important. If anything is delayed on the critical path, if a task is on the critical path and it gets delayed, everything after that point, even if the project plan is 10,000 lines long, you can tell at task number 3 of that 10,000 task list, if task number 3 runs late, every other task that comes after it is now late too. So now you have to work your little buns off to try and pull it back, because if you've lost 2 days, you've got to regain it somewhere in order to keep the rest of your timeline intact. Yeah?
If you had 20 days to do it, could you then add 2 days float to all of your parts?
You could possibly share it out depending, and this is what a lot of project managers do. In order to make sure that they have enough float built in, very few project managers will go with a plan like this, with lots of float zeros. What they're going to try and do is say something like along the lines of, I estimate task number 1 as being 4 days, I'm going to call it 6. And they'll build in a buffer of 50%. You know, task number 2, I think, based on my experience and what my knowledge is telling me, it's going to be 3 days, but I'm going to call it 4. And what you tend to find is that the project managers at each of these tasks will build in some risk mitigation around the fact that they don't know everything. And even though they're estimating it, they want a bit of a buffer built in, just in case. This is why I've said before that when you're estimating projects, experienced project managers will often rock up and say, this project is 200 days long, but they've estimated it at something like 150 days. The other 50 days are their risk management strategy. They don't know what the risks are yet. They don't know what might trigger a risk. They don't even know if the risk is going to occur. But it's just an in case. It's an insurance policy. Having an extra 50 days up your sleeve will help you bring the project in according to the timeline. Very few, none in my experience, of project managers who will absolutely estimate it 100% to the best of their ability will put that project forward for sign-off without putting some contingency buffer of time in there. Because you have to. We know projects run late. Something's going to happen, guaranteed. Your estimates are guesswork. They're the best guess you can have, but they're not 100% accurate every single time. So you need to try and put a contingency or a buffer into your time scenario. And this project management technique of PERT will tell you where your critical dependencies are in terms of time and task duration, and also where your critical path is. The critical path will allow you to understand when your project gets late before anyone else does. This is one of the most powerful techniques a project manager has at their disposal in terms of operationally running a project. They know the project is late before anyone else is aware of it, which means they can ask you to work an extra couple of hours tonight to try and pull the project back, or they can work an extra couple of hours, or they can schedule a bit of overtime or a little bit of weekend work on a Saturday morning or something, and then the rest of the timeline comes back into synchronization. This is one of the most powerful things that a project manager has to help them bring in a project. Because if you know that it's late before anyone else, you can fix it before anyone else realizes that there's a problem. If you don't know that you're running late, other people will find out, and then they'll come and question you about it and what you're going to do to fix it. And then you're playing catch up. You're responding. You're not ahead of where they are, and leading them along, you're trying to respond to all of their questions, which means that your time is now being taken up in emergency response. You can't run the project anymore in an emergency response mode. If you're not running a project as a project manager, it will fall further out of time alignment. So, critical path method. Forward pass is the earliest start date. Backward pass gives you the latest start date, and the float slack time is the latest start minus the earliest start, or the difference between those two. That gives you the area where you have slack built into your project plan. Now, I've included a little bit of a link there. I'm not going to show it up here. But at this point, you understand what you have to do, where your buffers of time happen to be, how long your project happens to be, where your critical task dependencies happen to be, and now you can come in and add resources. Because at this point, you know what has to execute before other things. So you can now come in and say, oh, I'll put John on that task and Sally on that task, and oh yeah, look, you know, Philip can work on this task over here for 3 days, and then I need to move him over to that task for another 2. At this point, you can recalculate your critical path, because not every resource, not every person that you have has the same expertise level. Your very experienced 30-year developer can knock over a task in 1 day that a trainee might take 9. So where do you put your trainee versus your most experienced people? This allows you to allocate time and resource against your estimates. But if you see a string of float equals 0, that's likely on your critical path. Now, it's possible to have more than one critical path through a project plan. And if you have every single task on your project plan on the critical path, you've got a problem, because if anything runs late, the entire project has failed. So you try and control your critical path as best you possibly can. Your critical path being the path where if anything slips, or if a task slips, it will impact heavily everything that comes after it. Okay. So rules of activity on the node, network display diagrams. There is only one start node. You can't have multiple starting positions. If you're doing a road race, you don't have one car start in one state and another car start somewhere else. They all start on the same starting line. And one end node, because they all have to cross the same finish line. Time moves from left to right. You can't have arrows going back. So, for example, if I had that with an arrow going from T3 back to T2, that's impossible. It doesn't happen. If you ever see a PERT or a network diagram that has that, they do not understand what they're doing. Now, as part of assignment 2, you need to create a Gantt chart, you need to create a task list, you need to create a PERT diagram. You've got to do this. If you create a PERT diagram, a network display diagram, that has arrows going back in time, well, we automatically know it's wrong. We don't need to look at it any further. We can just cross that off. It's wrong. Nodes are labelled sequentially where you can. You won't get it perfect, because you can add new tasks later in, you can take tasks away, and sometimes when you parallel tasks, you find that you start to lose the sequence. But generally try and keep them in sequence where you can, because when you're looking at a network display diagram that has many thousands of tasks on it, like up on a wall, you know that task 10 is likely near the beginning and task 10,000 is likely near the end. So if you can keep the sequencing roughly in order, it helps a lot with communication and reading it. On the forward pass, you take the bigger number, because you're trying to work out how long the project will take. On the backward pass, take the smaller number, because you're trying to work out where your critical areas of float happen to be or not be, and you're trying to work with the critical path. Network may not contain loops. You can't have a task go back to itself. So, for example, you can't start task 2 and then have a loop coming back to the beginning of task 2. No, you finished it. It's either done or it's not done. You can't restart it again by going back in time and you know, to its initial conception. Time always moves left to right, which means you can't have a task loop back on itself. Network may not contain dangles. Accepting the start and end, each must have an activity preceding and following it. Now, this rule applies only for activity on the node types of PERT. You can have something that's called a dummy in activity on the arrow. I'm not going to go through that one. Just take it here as a given that this rule applies, and it's one of the things that actually make activity on the node versions of PERT a lot more straightforward. When you've got to work out dummies for the other version, it's complex, let me say. I won't go into how to create a dummy node. You don't need them in this particular version with activity on the node. Project estimating then becomes the greatest challenge for estimating a project is the time and estimate for the largest deliverable, which happens to be the product you're creating, the actual system outcome. Because remember, at the beginning, when you're trying to estimate a consecutive series of tasks, is often when you have the least information. The task hasn't been done yet. When you're trying to work out how long it will take you to write an assignment, what do? Give me an idea. How do you go about creating an assignment? If I give you an assignment to do, like assignment number 1, how did you work out how long it would take you to write it? You all did this. You all tried to figure out how long it would take, because I know some of you started like 3 days before it was due. So you must have had an estimate of how long it would be before you can, in order to be able to meet the deadline. How did you work out your estimates? Sorry? On previous experience, yes. That's absolutely one way of doing it. A 2,500 word assignment, based upon the assignments I've written of a similar length in previous semesters, is probably going to take me about 3 to 4 days. If I have to do a lot of research, add on another 2 days. If I have to go and talk to other people and get access to a scarce resource that's only available at certain points along the way, maybe add another 2 to 3 days to that. You start working out based on experience. And that is absolutely one way of doing it. I'm going to go through a couple of techniques here. But the challenge lies in trying to estimate something that's logical, not physical. You're trying to work out something that hasn't happened yet, something that spans forward into the future. But you're at the beginning of that, and that's when you have the least amount of information. Everything you're doing at this point is an informed guess. Here are some approaches to estimating. All of them have been used, and all of them are valid. Some are better than others at certain things. Guesstimating, Delphi technique, time boxing, analogous estimates, top-down, bottom-up, and parametric. Now, if we take a look at these, estimating or guesstimating. Based on feeling, oh, I think that'll take me 3 days. I'm pretty good. I can write that in 3 days. Yeah? I'm sure you've all done this. I know I have. It's like, yeah, I can do that. Except, you know, you get the phone call that, you know, your dog's sick and you've got to go and collect it from, you know, the veterinarian. You know, your sister needs a lift into her dance recital. You know, your mother calls and wants you to come around for dinner that night, so you can't work on your assignment. All of these things begin to come into play. So the estimate that you come up with for 3 days suddenly becomes 6 days. Planned versus actual. Sometimes they do not add up. Guesstimating is probably the least accurate. Not a good method, often used by inexperienced project managers. Because if you have no experience and you're not familiar with the actual techniques to use, the best you could do is say, which way is the wind blowing today? I think it will be about this. I will guess and hope for the best. It's not an accurate mechanism. By the way, you'll often find that managers do this a lot. Because they're the ones not actually doing the work, they will go with their best guess, and then they'll tell someone else to make it really happen. Delphi technique involves multiple anonymous experts. Each expert makes an estimate. Estimates are compared. It's called the Delphi technique because this is, you know, back in ancient times in the Mediterranean, around the area of Greece, there was an oracle that was called the Delphi oracle. And what would happen is that this was supposed to be connected to the Grecian gods, and, you know, you could go and you could pay your king. You could go up and you say, I'm going to attack this other country. Here is a sack of money, a sack of gold pieces. Can you tell me if my attack will be successful? And the oracle would take the money and they would, you know, go away for about an hour, and they'd come back and say, yes, the gods have spoken to me, your attack will be successful. What actually happened? This is a little bit of smoke and mirrors. What actually happened is they took the money, of course, and then they went behind the curtain and they had a number of people there. And it's like, you know, one person was a logistics expert, another person was an expert on military strategy, another person might have been on, you know, transport and supplies, and they would ask these people, okay, everyone take a vote. If Alexander of Macedon goes and attacks Persia, will he succeed? You know, this is the size of his army, this is the size of the army he's going against, you know, etc., etc. And everyone would say, yes, I think it will, no, I think it won't. And they'd actually take a vote, and then they'd work out particular scenarios, what if, and they'd try and remove the least likely, and then they'd take another vote until eventually they'd be able to say, yes, will the attack succeed, or no. And then the oracle would go out and say, yes, the gods have spoken, the attack will succeed. And, you know, the king would go away and say, great, the gods are on my side, we've had a foretelling that my attack will be successful, it's only just cost me a sack of gold, and he would go on and, you know, rampage through most of Western Europe. These are the Delphi technique. Basically, you get a group of experts in a room and you ask their opinions and you winnow out all of the least optimised options until you've only got one outcome. It's based on the experience of the people in the room, having subject matter knowledge. So when you come to do your estimates in your workshops, you're going to be calling on the people who did the scoping workshop, you're going to be calling on the people who did the task decomposition workshop, you're going to be calling on the people who did the risk workshop, and all of those areas, hopefully by now, because they finished their workshops and done their report, have some level of subject matter expertise in the scenario that I gave you. So they can all add their pieces in when people, whoever the task estimation group happens to be, when they start working out how long each of these tasks that you've accepted happen to be, you should have some backing to help you do that. Estimates compared close to average, else do another iteration. And by the way, we still use this in project management and also other things. This is how Olympic cities are chosen. So whatever city gets the Olympic Games, 4 years or, you know, whenever it happens to be, when they vote in the next Olympic city to host the Games, this is what they do. They use the Delphi technique to choose the next city. Yeah?
So in the event of negative outcomes like Rio, do they then no longer consult those experts?
If you get a negative outcome, do they no longer consult the experts? It really depends upon, I mean, when you come into estimating, there is no guaranteed answer for anything. All you can do is the best guess at the time based upon the information that you have. If you start choosing around things like, okay, if my information is faulty, will that give me a faulty outcome? The answer is most likely yes.
But the reason I mentioned Rio is because Rio ended up being a kind of a what the hell are you thinking?
Yeah, Rio was a bit of a what the hell you were thinking. But the same thing also applied to Greece, and they managed to pull it out at the very last moment when Greece was running the Olympics. Everyone was thinking the stadiums are only half built. We haven't got all of the logistics arranged. You know, the student village, the athletes' village is only half constructed, and we're supposed to be running Olympic Games in 6 months. In that particular time situation, with an Olympic Games coming up, you can't afford to run late. So in those situations, they threw a lot of money at it in order to pull it in. Rio didn't quite work. But the idea is to try and come up with something that is close enough to what we need to be able to do. I actually kind of like Delphi. When you're working with little information, go and talk to people who are supposed to know what they're doing. And I can pretty much guarantee you guys do this as well. You may not think of it as a Delphi technique, but if you want to know, oh, I've got a question about this assignment. I know Joe started writing his assignment 3 days ago. Let me go and talk to Joe, because Joe is now the expert. Joe's got 3 days more experience than I do. And I can ask him how long it took him to do question 1. You do this. You don't call it Delphi, but you do this. Time boxing. A box of time is allocated for a specific activity, task, or deliverable. Can focus the team of use effectively, can demoralise the team of use too often. In other words, we say, we have certain things that we need to do, you've got 5 days. That's it. You've got 5 days. You've got a box of time, and everything that you need to do to complete the deliverable has to be done with only that box of time. If it takes you 6 days, you failed. And again, this is how it works with Agile. Agile programming, Agile development, Agile projects. You'll have a box of time. Your time window is roughly, it can be a 30-day window. Usually it's done on a monthly basis, but it can be 2 weeks or 3 weeks, depending on what your organisation chooses. But you've got to complete a particular aspect of the project within that time box. And if you're the project manager, you've got to deliver, and your team has to deliver everything that you agreed to within that box of time. Because if you can't do it, if you can't show working software at the end of your 30-day time box, you failed. It's not maybe failed. It's not, oh, I'll do better next time. No, you failed. Absolutely. Yeah.
You hear about Agile project managers, and you're basically saying that each sprint is time boxing, and also that it will demoralise the team if used too often and ineffectively. So does that mean an Agile project manager is just going to slowly wear every team they work with into the ground?
Okay, the question was, given that within an Agile framework everything is time boxed, all of the activities in the sprint is part of a time box, does this mean that the project manager is continually wearing his project team down? And the answer is yes. But the thing is, not every sprint goes back to back. You work really hard for your 30-day window, and then you might have a day or a couple of days where you can catch your breath. You have time to recover a little bit, and then you go into the next sprint. If you're doing 30-day sprints back to back for a year and a half, you're going to kill your team. Or they'll kill you, yes. So as a project manager or a scrum master in those particular situations, you need to be very aware of how much resource you've got and how effectively you can use them. Because you can get your team to do things really intensively for a period of time. But if the timeline is too tight and they keep failing the sprint, either you have misrepresented the knowledge that the resources the people have in order to achieve your objective. You've taken a group of mid-level trainees and expected them to operate as if they were experts. You know, that 9 days, and you've estimated only 1, and they can't do it within that, which is not necessarily their fault, it's yours as the project manager or the scrum master. Because this is the job you're supposed to have. You're supposed to be able to sequence this successfully and estimate it so that people can do what they have to do. If you keep failing your time box, if you keep failing the sprint, something's wrong. It means that you probably have not included your floats successfully. You haven't put contingency and buffer in there. You're running on an estimate that has no freedom to go a little bit over in certain areas. You may have to redraw your project plan and take it longer. Analogous, based on similarity with and uses information from earlier projects. Because no projects happen in a vacuum, usually if you have an organisation that is project-based, there have been other projects that have run. So you go looking through the documentation or the previous libraries, or you go talking to people who worked on those previous projects and you say, hey, I'm running a project development activity very similar to what you did a year ago. What can you tell me about how you approached it? How long did it take? Have you got copies of your project plan from that point? Because I can actually use that as a basis for my own estimations. Because I'm a project manager starting a new project, I'm working with planned figures, planned estimates. I have no actuals yet. We haven't done any work. But a previous project has actual figures. It's completed. We know how long those tasks took. So I go looking through their project plan for tasks that I have that are similar in nature. And I will use their estimates as a foundation for mine. That's what's called analogous. Analogous meaning like to like. Top down. A favourite for top managers who absolutely don't know any better. Top managers determine the overall schedule and cost according to what they think it should be. We've got $1 million to spend, so your project is $1 million. Now, the project itself has not been estimated yet, but your manager has said, I'm going to give you $1 million, you have to deliver the project for $1 million. Well, at this point, we don't even know if it's reality. It might cost us $3 million to deliver that. And this is one of the reasons we get project overruns, is because people put up estimates based upon a lack of knowledge, not on reality. And even if you try and make it right after it, if you try and get people to work hard, if the estimates are so badly wrong at the start, no matter what ground you make up, it probably won't be enough. Now, top managers are notorious for this because they deal with big numbers. They don't deal with operational activities. So it can be very optimistic because they might have $1 million to spend, but they really only want you to spend $750,000. So even though they might have $1 million, they'll tell you $750,000 because they want you to bring it in at the most optimistic view. And guess what? If you accept it, you've got to bring it in for $750,000. That is your new project target. Even if you've done your estimates and worked out it's going to be $1 million, if your boss says $750,000 is what I'm going to give you, and you agree to it, that is now your target. You've got to try and work out how to do $1 million project for only 3/4 of the budget. Lower level managers are expected to do the breakdown because usually say, here's $1 million, break it down and associate it with individual tasks. And lower level managers are expected to do that. And this is where it comes back to the work breakdown structure. So we've got an example here. Okay, we're going to create a test results report, 6.2 on our work breakdown structure. 6.2.1, review the test plan. 6.2.2, carry out the test plan. Right down to 6.2.6, address any software issues or problems. So we've got within that 7 tasks in order for this creation of 6.2 test results report to complete successfully. Top down says our budget is not only money, it's also time. I will give you 17 days to do this. That's your time box. This is the top-down estimate. And then the project manager or the scrum master comes along and takes the requirements and allocates durations to each of the pieces of work. And at the end of it, it has to add up to 17 days. So it takes that 17 days and allocates individual discrete elements out to task lists. Sorry, is that a question or? Okay. Bottom-up estimating is the other way of doing it. And this is the most common form for project estimation by project managers, because this is dealing with operational constraints and reality as best they possibly can. Schedules and budgets are constructed from the work breakdown structure. Starts with people who will be doing the work. You go and talk to the people. Joe, how long will this take you? Oh, I'm not very experienced with that piece of technology. If I was more knowledgeable, I could probably do it in 3 days, but I think it's going to take me 4. So the project manager says, okay, Joe does that. It'll take him 4 days. And we work with that. You go talk to people and you try and seek their input. The thing is, the project manager may not be the smartest person in the room. And even if they are the smartest person in the room, they don't necessarily have all of the knowledge. If you've got a team, use their brains. Pull in their knowledge. You might have 20 people on your project team. I can tell you your estimates are going to be much more accurate if you're getting information from 20 people than if you're just trying to do it all by yourself. And believe me, it's a lot less work than trying to figure it out yourself. So when it comes to this, we go and talk to the people working on the individual activities. You get the estimates and then you add them up to give you your summary figure. So bottom up starts at the lowest level task, you add them up. Top down starts at a high number that you're given and you allocate it out. So this is the difference, and guess what? In assignment number 2, you have to do both methods. You're given a number based on the scenario that the client thinks this particular project of these resorts is going to take. But they don't know how accurate that is, so as part of the briefing paper you've got to do a top-down and bottom-up estimate, compare those two, and then make a recommendation. Is the number that the client is giving you a realistic number? Is it too much? Is it too little? Then we have parametric model, and this is used a lot in software engineering as opposed to just plain old software development. If you're coming at it from an engineering point of view, you tend to use formulas and statistics a lot. So mathematical algorithms, mathematical frameworks and modelling. Counting up lines of code. You know, I think it will take me 1 minute to write a line of code. Therefore, if I have to write 1,000 lines of code, it will take me 1,000 minutes. Not counting testing. Constructive cost model, COCOMO. Function point analysis, which used to be quite a favourite of IBM, which looks up things like data points. Where are my inputs? Where are my outputs? How many databases am I talking to, etc. An example, if you're doing with $50 per every line of code created based on a programming language, the level of expertise, size and complexity, you can work out if my project requires a particular module of 1,000 lines, at $50 per line, I know that that particular module is going to cost me $50,000 to build. This is parametric modelling, using algorithms, statistical analysis, and some way of counting. So, they're the estimation approaches that you've got. Are there any questions on that before we move into our last slide or two? Is it clear? Okay, good. No questions. I'm going to assume you're all perfect experts at this now. You will be using it for assignment number 2. And I gave you a strong hint that something from this slide set will probably pop up on the exam. A few final words. You can't manage what you don't know. Sequence the tasks in parallel where you can, because it shortens the overall time frame. If you have to do everything nose to tail, that's going to be a very long project. If you can shrink it down by doing lots of tasks at the same time, then the overall project timeline shrinks. You can take a 200-day project down to maybe 80 days if you're doing enough things at the same time, assuming you've got the resources. Estimating is usually done poorly. I have yet to see any project in my entire career that delivered on the estimates that were put forward as version 1.0. They always change. We always get it wrong. I have seen ones that have come close, but that isn't to say that their estimates were good at the start. What it's telling you is it's a good project manager because they knew how to get the most out of their team to make it look like the estimates were correct. If I say this is going to cost 500 days, I really don't know at the beginning of the project if it's 500 days. But what I can do is I can sequence my people and the resources and the tasks to have them work a little bit overtime, work the occasional weekend, and at the end, even if the actual duration of the project, according to the task list, would have taken us 600 days, I can bring it in for 500 by just getting people to work 20% harder. And maybe I make it an incentive for them. I'll pay them a little bit of money. If they bring it in early, we can, I'll pay a bonus. But this is how good project managers do it. And at the end, they get up and say, I estimated 500 days. We brought it in for 500 days. Aren't I great? I'm a terrific estimator when it comes to projects. What they don't tell you is they didn't know really what they were doing to the level of information you think they do. What they knew how to do was to take that planned figure and get people to work harder and get the most out of their productivity and efficiency and effectiveness to make a 600-day project come in 500 days. But at the end, everyone says, wow, what a great project manager. They said 500 days 2 years ago, or, and they brought it in for that. This is how project managers get a good reputation. If you find someone who's got a good reputation for project estimating, it's worthwhile hiring them because they may not be a great estimator. I can probably tell you that they're okay, but they won't be perfect. But what they are good at doing is marshalling people to achieve an objective. And that tells you a lot right there about the capability of the person you're talking to for that project management job. Estimates are really management targets. They're numbers you give to management so that they can play with them while you get on and do the real job. Collect as much information about previous projects as possible because having a lot of historical information about how your company approaches things, how long things take, given the resources that is likely to be expended, that will change from situation and circumstance to situation and circumstance. One company might be able to do a project in a year. Another company doing the same project might have to take a year and a half because projects are unique by their nature and not everyone has the same capability. That includes not only individuals but also organisations. Use more than one method of estimating. You have to double check, you have to validate your estimates as best you possibly can. Know that your estimates are wrong, but they can be made less wrong if you apply a couple of different estimation techniques and they come out roughly about the same. Top-down is okay in the early stages because you're going to start with some numbers, and guesstimates based on experience are probably as good as anything else. But later on, go through the bottom-up process. When you've got more information, use it. Seek a range of opinions. Go out and talk to people. As I said, you might think you're the most experienced and smartest one in the room, but you're only one person. If there are 20 other people there, some of those guys and girls might have some more information that you are unaware of. Document your methods, record your assumptions, because that's your starting point. Apply contingency reserves, such as 20%. I used to think at least 20%. If I estimated that a task would take 5 days, I would call it 6. And that's the estimate that I would put up, at a minimum. If I could get away with more, I would. If I could call it 8, I'd go with that. But usually you end up padding your estimates out so much that the project just becomes unviable. If you take a 100-day project and you estimate it and it suddenly becomes 800 days, no one's going to pay for it, which means you haven't got a project, you haven't got a job. So you have to bring some level of reality into your estimates as best you possibly can. Regularly reevaluate your estimates because, as I said, when we're going through the PERT thing, the project manager, if they know their job and they're doing it well and they have a good sequencing diagram to work with, they will know when the project is late before anyone else. And that's a very, very powerful thing. But it also means you have to come back and reevaluate on a continuing basis. Have we run a little bit late? Has my critical path ticked over? Have I gone beyond my float or my slack time? Do I need to reevaluate, get a few people to work harder or a little bit later? Do I need to work harder a little bit later this week in order to be able to pull my timeline back on track? The fact that you know that information before anyone else lets you fix it before anyone else finds out about it. And you get a really good reputation as a project manager if you can do that. And if you think project management, especially when it comes to estimation, is a little bit smoke and mirrors, yes, it's absolutely true. Estimates are a marketing target. We put them up as project managers thinking best guess at the time, and then we work really, really hard to try and make it look like that number was reality all the way along. If you agree to that number, now you've got to try and put proof behind it. Which is why inexperienced project managers usually have trouble with estimation, because whatever number they put up is based upon lack of experience. And they don't necessarily have the track record to know how to cut corners when they need to. Okay, are there any questions? Okay, quiz again. I'll put that up there. You can have a look at it in your own time. Anything else before we finish? I appreciate you coming out on a Thursday night. I know it's getting cold and we're sort of moving towards winter, so I appreciate the effort of those of you who come along regularly. It gives me encouragement to do the same thing and to actually turn up on time. Enjoy the rest of your evening, enjoy your Fridays, and enjoy your weekends. Look forward to seeing you all again next week. Wisdom helps, but you have to go and collect a lot of bumps to realise that wisdom. Even though project managers may not be the smartest person in the room, most of the time they have very large egos and they think they are. It takes experience to work out that...
Good project manager is the wisest and the wiser than the smartest.
Yes.
Hey, what's up, guys?
But most project managers, they're project managers, they have egos. They know they can do things. No one else can do it. They can walk on water given the right incentive.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
You'll find project managers very good people, very good with politics, and they're very confident in what they do.
When you said that smoke and mirrors, I was saying smoke and mirrors the side of
Oh, yeah, but I think
and
I think
project
it's...
managers
Yeah, I
using those smoke and mirrors, also know smoke and mirrors the side of
I'm